My name is Aria Vale, 26 years old. The server room breathed like a sleeping animal, fans purring, blue LEDs blinking their patient code while the building above me rehearsed its morning performance. Down here, cable trays webbed the ceiling like arteries, and backup generators crouched in a row, waiting for disasters that only ever came for other people. I sat cross-legged on the cold tile with my laptop balanced on my knees, finishing an overnight patch rollout and timing the reboot windows so nobody upstairs noticed the brief heartbeats when their world went dark and mine kept it alive. Through thin concrete and thicker carpet, footsteps passed overhead. Executive floor. My father's corner office. My brother David's vice president's suite. My sister Catherine's strategy bullpen, glass-walled and immaculate. They spent their days in boardrooms with skyline views, managing portfolios and courting clients, and speaking in careful verbs to people who liked being persuaded. I spent mine keeping the skeleton standing. My family called it playing with computers. I called it maintaining the digital backbone of a $2.3 billion investment firm that carried our last name like a crown and a curse. An alert pulsed on my screen, an attempted purge in the analytics share. Not a deletion, not bold enough for that, but an alteration. A sequence of error logs from the risk model David had been parading around for weeks, suddenly compressed to a single line item, archived. The timestamp didn't match the automated job schedule I'd designed. Someone had taken a broom to footprints they thought a board member might follow. I flagged the event, mirrored the segment to an off-site vault, and let the share keep telling its neat little story. The neat ones are the easiest to unravel. The intercom I'd installed a year ago crackled, a little private wire between basement and throne room. Aria, you down there? David didn't wait for an answer. He never did. Catherine's tablet isn't syncing. She's presenting to the external advisors at 10. Dad says get up here now. I'm in the middle of a live patch, I said, because truth felt less like honesty and more like gravity. Constant, ignored. Give me 10 minutes. Make it 5. The intercom clicked off. I closed the last window, logged the completion, and set the failover monitors to loud. The elevators were being serviced again because nothing in this building worked unless I maintained it personally. 5 flights of stairs later, the executive corridor greeted me with its hush and expensive scent, cedar polish, old leather, ambition. Dad's door stood ajar, his voice a careful murmur into a call, one hand slicing the air at a frozen screen as if intimidation worked on software. Catherine intercepted me before I reached him, thrusting her tablet forward like a prosecutor slamming evidence on the table. It's not pulling mail, and before you say anything, yes, I charged it, and yes, I rebooted. Her hair was perfect, her expression sharper. I took the tablet. The problem was immediate. She'd disabled Cloud Sync while trying to save battery. You toggled this off, I said. Here. 30 seconds, 2 taps, a push profile refresh. The inbox bloomed. Fixed. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. Finally, it's been 2 days. You could have asked 2 days ago. I was busy. She'd already turned, typing as she walked. Over her shoulder, like perfume. And Aria, shareholder meeting is at 2. Don't schedule anything that might make us look amateur. I sent reminders last week, I said. To no one. She was gone. Dad's office was exactly as it had been when I was 8, and believed the view could teach you more than numbers could. Dark wood, framed photographs of him, shaking hands with men who liked their ties as tight as their smiles, a single portrait with my grandfather, Thomas Harrison, in front of a small brick storefront that had eventually grown into this castle. Dad pointed at his computer with the kind of impatience that felt like inheritance. It's frozen. It's not, I said, stepping behind the desk. The software he needed was the one he'd uninstalled last month despite my warnings about licensing conflicts. I restored the image, relaunched the client. 40 seconds. All set. He nodded without looking at me, still talking about optics and timelines and the Chin account. I stood for a second, considering whether to tell him about the scrubbed error logs, the pattern that kept repeating in smaller, quieter ways. I didn't. Not yet. I left him to his view. In the hallway, my reflection drifted across glass walls. Company polo, dark jeans, hair pulled back, the uniform of the person you thank when the projector works and forget when the lights turn on. The shareholder meeting would be theater. Dad with his practice confessionals, Catherine with her slides that made risk look like a perfectly set table, David with his gleam and his new fund proposal, a high-growth vehicle wired to a model that wanted 6 months to pretend it was 20 years. The numbers glittered, if you didn't squint. I had learned to live with my eyes narrowed. What nobody knew, what no one could know without a lawyer, a key, and a letter, was that the assets they were discussing didn't belong to them. They never had. I took the stairs down because falling felt more honest than riding. In the lobby, an AV contractor in a gray polo I didn't recognize was rolling a case past security. He caught my eye and smiled too easily. "Which room's the board in?" he asked, as if we'd spoken before. "Main conference," I said. "Pas." I said. "Who booked you?" "Facilities," he said quickly. "Routine check." We didn't use outside AV for the main room. I did our routine checks. He looked past me a beat too long, like he was waiting for permission to belong. His badge read A. Mercer, printed that morning. I watched him wheel the case into the elevator, then opened a maintenance app on my phone and pinged facilities. "Did we hire AV today?" A dot blinked in the corner of the screen while the elevator doors closed. "No record," came the reply. I filed the name, sent a silent alert to building security, and told myself not to chase every shadow today. There were bigger ones arriving at 2. Back in the server room, I opened the fireproof lockbox under the lowest rack and took out the letter with the cracking fold lines. James Morrison, senior partner at Morrison & Associates, had delivered it on my 23rd birthday with a small smile that made me feel like the floor had already moved, and I just hadn't noticed yet. "Aria," it began in my grandfather's patient hand. "If you're reading this, you are now the legal owner of the Harrison portfolio. Your father will believe he controls these assets. He does not. He never has. The company may manage on your behalf. Ownership, however, is yours." He'd left the company structure, the brand, the building, the client relationships, to his children, my father and my Aunt Rebecca, who'd retired to Monaco and sent holiday emails that read like postcards from someone else's dream. But the assets themselves, $500 million at the time of his death, split across sectors with the kind of caution that dared anyone to call it timid. He left to me, effective on my 23rd birthday. There was a P.S., not warm, but not unkind. "You understand systems, not just appearances. Owners must know where leverage hides. Use it quietly until you must use it loudly." I'd underlined 2 sentences the first night I read it, and underlined them again now, the ink like small rails. Stewardship is proved under pressure. Do not confuse victory with humiliation. For 3 years, I kept the secret. For 3 years, I monitored the systems everyone else assumed. I maintained for their convenience every email, every spreadsheet, every temporary shared drive that metastasized into permanent religion. Not to spy, to understand, to decide whether the people managing my inheritance deserved the trust I'd been told to give them, until they asked me, by mistake or design, to stop. I'd watched David assemble his innovation fund, the way his wrist deck airbrushed correlation out of pictures like an X you pretend never mattered. He was ambitious and genuinely brilliant in the way that glows brightest right before it burns. Catherine's intelligence moved like a blade, quick, precise, drawn to the slickest angle, but I'd seen the emails she never sent, the drafts where she typed, "I'm not sure," and then deleted it. Dad's stewardship had kept us steady through the years, when everyone else jumped for shinier numbers. But steadiness and sleep are cousins. Sometimes they make you miss the fire at the edge of the map. I knew their strengths. I knew their blind spots. I also knew that today, at 2 o'clock, they would attempt to transfer 40% of my assets into a vehicle that assumed the future owed us a favor. I resecured the letter and opened the dashboard for the main conference room. The AV status read, "Ready." I ran a silent diagnostic anyway. Everything green. I scrubbed the residual caches on the presentation machine and left only a ghost. A local copy of David's deck with the error-suppressed slides flagged under an invisible layer. If his model broke, it would break honestly. The security system pinged. The contractor's badge was invalidated on the executive floor. Good. Let the building remember its own boundaries for once. At 12:30, I ate at my desk. Almonds, a banana, the usual truce with hunger. and told myself to breathe the way they tell you to breathe when you're about to dive too deep to resurface casually. At 1, the first board members arrived. Their devices announced themselves to my network like polite strangers. At 1:30, my father asked where the extra microphones were stored. At 1:55, David rehearsed his opening in the corridor with the door just cracked enough to let his confidence leak into the room, a scent stronger than cedar. I have always believed in timing. In chess, in markets, in family. The difference between silence and secrecy is whether you plan to speak. At 1:59, I packed my laptop, clipped my badge to my collar, and climbed the stairs to the room where they thought decisions happened. They were going to propose a major restructuring that would fundamentally change how the portfolio was managed. They were going to vote on transferring $200 million into a new high-risk fund that David had designed. They were going to need my approval. They just didn't know it yet. The main conference room stretched like a stage designed for intimidation, long mahogany table, 12 high-backed chairs on each side, floor-to-ceiling windows leaking light across polished surfaces. The glass wall at the far end reflected the skyline, a reminder that money here meant altitude. I sat in the corner where the AV controls lived, laptop humming quietly, a cord snake coiled near my feet. It was the seat of the invisible, close enough to hear every syllable, far enough that nobody thought to look. At 2 sharp, Dad cleared his throat at the head of the table. His tie was tighter than usual, the veins in his temple lightly pressed from years of expectation. Catherine was already flipping through her notes, her nails clicking like metronomes. David adjusted his cufflinks with the satisfaction of someone who thought power looked best when it shined. "Good afternoon," Dad began, voice polished from decades of doing this dance. "We've had a strong year. Conservative growth, stable returns, a few hiccups in emerging markets, but the trajectory remains positive." The board murmured approval. Some nodded, some scribbled. Richard Chin, lean and precise, tilted his head but said nothing yet. Maria Santos, younger, with a gaze that missed nothing, tapped her pen once against her folder. Then David stood, sleek in an expensive suit, his grin calibrated for cameras that weren't there. "Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison Financial Group has built its reputation by playing safe. But safety is stagnation. The market is changing. Our clients are younger, more risk-tolerant, more eager to be part of innovative strategies. That's why I propose the Harrison Innovation Fund." He clicked his remote. The screen behind him bloomed with graphs that climbed like mountain trails into blue sky. The board leaned forward. "We're looking at $200 million allocated toward high-growth technology sectors, cryptocurrency integration, and select emerging markets. The projected returns," he clicked again. A graph soared upward, impossibly smooth, "are exceptional. Over 20 years, we're projecting growth north of 300%. A low whistle came from one of the external advisors. I watched the numbers. They were the same ones I had fixed this morning. Error messages hidden, formulas smoothed. I'd left the underlying flaws untouched. My stomach tightened. Richard Chin adjusted his glasses. "David, what's your downside protection here? This is 40% of managed assets. What happens if the tech and crypto sectors align negatively?" David smiled, the way he always did when anyone threatened to scrape the shine. "Diversification. Spread across uncorrelated asset classes. Our risk modeling shows a maximum downside of 15%. That was it. I could feel my pulse climbing. My grandfather's words echoed. "Stewardship is proved under pressure." I leaned closer to the microphone embedded in the AV console. My voice carried, quiet but distinct. "Your diversification model doesn't account for correlation between crypto and tech. If they both decline simultaneously, which happened twice in the last 5 years, you're looking at losses of 40 to 60%, not 15. Every head turned. Even the city outside seemed to hold its breath. David blinked at me, face reddening. "Aria, this is a board meeting, not IT support." "I'm aware," I said. "I'm also aware your projections are based on 6 months of data extrapolated 20 years forward. Statistically, it's unreliable." Silence. Then a sharp intake from Maria Santos. She leaned forward. "She's right. Look at the cross-sector volatility from the last downturn. These losses could be catastrophic." David's jaw flexed. "She doesn't understand investment modeling. She keeps the Wi-Fi running." I understand correlation coefficients, I said evenly. I understand that presenting flawed projections as innovation isn't just reckless, it's negligent. Dad's voice sliced across the table hard. Enough. Aria, stay in your lane. Maria frowned. Why? She's raising valid concerns. I'd like to hear more. She doesn't have the expertise, Catherine started. I have a master's in financial engineering from MIT, I said quietly. The words landed like glass breaking. I completed it in night classes over 4 years while working here. None of you asked. The room tilted. For once, Catherine had nothing to say. Before anyone could gather a response, the double doors opened. A man in his 60s stepped in, briefcase polished to a quiet shine. I knew him at once. James Morrison, senior partner at Morrison & Associates. The air shifted, like someone had pulled a lever none of us saw. Mr. Morrison, Dad said, standing quickly. We weren't expecting you. Is this about the quarterly review? No, Morrison said, voice steady. This is about authorization. He walked to the table, unlatched his case, and laid down a thick document. His hand pressed it flat, deliberate. This board is about to vote on a transfer of assets that requires approval from the legal owner of the portfolio. That owner is not present. I'm the owner, Dad said sharply. I founded this company with my father. I've managed these assets for 30 years. You've managed them, Morrison said, but you don't own them. He turned, eyes finding mine. The Harrison portfolio belongs to Aria Vale. Time stuttered. Catherine's pen fell and clattered like a gunshot. David half laughed, then stopped when nobody joined him. What? Dad's voice was hollow. Morrison slid the trust document across the table. Thomas Harrison established this allocation 18 years ago. When he died, the company's structure went to his children, but the assets, the portfolio, transferred to his granddaughter on her 23rd birthday. That granddaughter is Ms. Vale. Catherine went pale, like the oxygen had thinned. We've been managing those assets for 6 years. Under Ms. Vale's implicit authorization, Morrison replied smoothly. Major restructuring, however, requires her explicit approval. Dad turned to me. Did you know? Yes, I said. For how long? 3 years. The words hit like stones. The board murmured, a dozen private calculations whirring behind calm faces. David slammed a hand against the table. This is fraud. She's been spying on us. I'm the IT administrator, I cut in. I have access to everything because it's my job, and because it's my right. They're my assets. This is insane, David spat. You've been sitting in the basement while we built this company, and now you claim it's yours? Not the company, I said. The portfolio, the $500 million you've been managing, sometimes poorly. Richard Chin cleared his throat. She's correct. The performance data shows underperformance relative to benchmarks. Mediocre results. David lunged. We delivered growth. 4.2% annually, I said. Market average was 7.3. That's $47 million in lost returns over 6 years. Mediocre isn't an insult, it's math. Morrison snapped his case shut. The trust is ironclad. Any transfer requires Ms. Vale's signature. She is rejecting this proposal. The board erupted, questions and side murmurs colliding. Maria Santos spoke loudest. Then the Innovation Fund is tabled. Without her approval, it cannot proceed. I closed my laptop slowly, the hum of the projector filling the silence. Every eye was on me. I've allowed this management to continue for 3 years, I said. That ends today. I'm commissioning a full audit of all decisions, all allocations, all risks. I want to see exactly how my assets have been handled, starting now. David's glare was molten. Catherine's silence was sharper than words. Dad looked at me as though the portrait in his office had come alive and walked into the room. Aria, he whispered, not to me, but to the ghost of his father. You planned this. I prepared, I said. There's a difference. And for the first time, the room realized that the quiet hum in the corner was not background noise. It was the sound of ownership. The boardroom emptied like a church after confession. People whispering. Papers shuffled too quickly, eyes avoiding mine as though catching my gaze might pin them to one side of history. David stormed out without looking back, his shoulders stiff, jaw clenched. Catherine followed more slowly, her tablet pressed tight against her chest, her face pale but unreadable. Dad lingered last, still staring at the trust document as if his father's handwriting had just betrayed him in real time. By the time I reached the server room, HR had already left me 3 messages. Aria, could you come upstairs? We've prepared an office for you. Their voices trembled with a rehearsed politeness, like they were addressing someone they weren't quite sure how to treat yet. Employee, executive, usurper. I ignored the calls for now. The server room door clicked shut behind me, sealing in the familiar hum. My monitors bloomed with alerts, logins, remote connections, background chatter of a company in quiet panic. At 7:43 p.m., while most of the building cleared out, a spike appeared, an attempted export from one of David's analyst accounts. The file name, client master, zipped and encrypted. Another file followed, Risk Macro 22, the proprietary model I'd watched him build and break a dozen times. I didn't stop the transfer. Instead, I mirrored it, timestamped every packet, and rerouted a clean copy into a locked archive I controlled. He thought he was sneaking secrets out the back door. In reality, he'd just handed me proof of intent. The old Aria would have flagged security immediately, escalated to Dad, maybe even HR. Tonight, I let the system breathe and told myself restraint was the truest test of power. Stewardship is proved under pressure, my grandfather's words again. The following morning, HR intercepted me before I could reach the basement. Jennifer, the director, stood in the hallway holding a folder too big for its contents. Aria, she said, eyes darting, we've converted a corner office for you. 5th floor, east wing. It has windows. She said windows as if they were currency. I followed her. The office was polished. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, glass wall overlooking the skyline I had once only glimpsed through reflections. A plaque already sat on the desk. Aria Vale, portfolio owner. Too formal, too fast. There's more, Jennifer added nervously. David and Catherine submitted resignations late last night. Both of them? Yes. David's was one line. I won't work under fraud. Catherine's was longer. She said it would be too humiliating to work for her younger sister. She requested that we process immediately. Jennifer paused. Do you want me to file them? I stared at the plaques, the leather, the view. File them, I said. My voice didn't crack, but something inside me did. Dad called me that afternoon. His extension blinked, the same line that used to summon me for frozen screens or forgotten passwords. Now it summoned me for something heavier. Aria, he said, come to my office. His office was unchanged, though the man behind the desk looked older, shoulders heavier. He didn't rise when I entered. His hand rested on a framed photograph of him and my grandfather outside the original Harrison storefront. They quit, he said flatly. I know. David's talking to lawyers. Catherine's packing her things. And me? He gestured vaguely. I don't know where I fit anymore. I stayed standing deliberately because sitting would have made me small again. You're still CEO. The structure is yours. The clients, the reputation, the brand. But the assets, the decisions about them, go through me now. That doesn't erase your value. It just defines it. He laughed once, bitter and low. Value defined by what my daughter allows. 30 years building this company, and suddenly I'm ornamental. No, I said. You're the bridge. Clients trust you. They won't trust me yet. Not all of them. You can steady them while I restructure the portfolio. That's what you do best. He leaned back, studying me. And what do you do best? I thought of the server room, the lines of code, the way silence tells you where the danger is. I see the systems, all of them, where they fail, where they pretend to work. His eyes flickered, like recognition had finally arrived late to the party. Thomas always said you were like him. I thought he meant introverted. I didn't realize he meant strategic. Maybe he meant both, I said softly. Silence stretched, heavy, but not suffocating. For once, it wasn't the silence of dismissal, but of recalibration. That night, back in the corner office, I sat at the desk under the glow of city lights. The skyline looked sharper from here, but emptier too. My phone buzzed with texts. Maria Santos. That took courage. You'll have allies here. Richard Chin. Impressive. Let's meet to discuss audit scope. And one more, unsigned, but easy to guess. You think this is over. It isn't. I shut the phone off and opened my laptop. The audit framework was already drafting itself in my mind. Weeks of combing, months of building. I whispered aloud the 3 underlined lines from my grandfather's letter, tasting the words like steel. Stewardship is proved under pressure. Do not confuse victory with humiliation. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find my name already etched into the directory downstairs. Not pencil, not paper, etched. Inside my new office, a sealed envelope sat on the desk. No signature, only a typed line. If you're serious about an audit, look at account 7RD. Start there. The game wasn't over. It was only shifting floors. The first week after the boardroom eruption felt less like victory and more like an occupation. My name had been etched into the lobby directory, my office furnished with mahogany and glass, but every glance in the hallway carried hesitation. Who exactly was I now? Colleague? Boss? Imposter? I didn't answer. I hired 6 analysts, 2 portfolio managers, a chief risk officer. They arrived in staggered order, each clutching resumes that glowed with credentials but carried an unspoken question. Were they joining a company or a battlefield? I answered by throwing them into whiteboard sessions that stretched past midnight. We pulled apart every position, every hedge, every house wisdom trade that had calcified under my family's management. I watched their hands scrawl equations, their eyes spark when flaws surfaced. For the first time in years, the numbers were being interrogated, not polished. Catherine's office sat empty 2 doors down. She hadn't cleared it yet, though her resignation was on file. Every day I passed her closed door and wondered if silence could be a form of bargaining. The audit framework grew. Color-coded maps sprawled across glass walls, green for stable, yellow for questionable, red for reckless. Too much red. 3 positions stood out. Short-dated options bundled inside long-term vehicles, hedges that weren't hedges at all, but fragile bets waiting for someone to shift the spotlight. They only made sense if someone had expected to bury variance inside a larger fund. David's fingerprints were everywhere. At the end of the second week, the leak hit. A headline blinked across industry feeds. Family coup at Harrison Financial, 500 million portfolio in play. The article quoted an internal source claiming the board was in chaos, that clients were fleeing, that a secret audit would expose catastrophic losses. My phone lit up with worried messages from advisors. Before panic could metastasize, I chose my weapon: transparency, sharp and surgical. That afternoon, we compiled a performance deck showing 3-year numbers, including underperformance. No excuses, no spin. I sent it directly to our top 20 clients with a note. We are conducting a full audit to improve performance. You will have quarterly updates directly from me. Stewardship requires honesty. By evening, 3 clients had already replied. Appreciate the candor. Let's talk next week. David must have read the same article, because the next morning, 6 client accounts showed activity from outside IP addresses, calls, meeting requests, poaching attempts. He wasn't subtle. I countered with a protection plan: scheduled one-on-one calls, service incentives, transparent communication. I didn't plead for loyalty. I proved it was worth staying. Catherine reappeared in my doorway on the 4th Monday. She didn't knock. You've gutted my strategy decks, she said flatly. They weren't strategy, they were packaging. Her mouth twitched. So what now? I walk away and let David burn this place from the outside? I studied her. Catherine had always worn confidence like armor, but today her eyes flickered. Fear, anger, something smaller. I want you in client relations, I said. You're good with people. You make them feel seen. Do that here, but you won't touch the portfolio. Her silence stretched, brittle. Finally, she nodded once. Fine, but don't expect thank yous. I don't, I said. I expect results. That night, my father called me into his office. He wasn't angry. He looked tired, holding a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. The blinds were drawn, the city sealed out. Your grandfather didn't trust me, he said quietly. Not with the assets. He trusted you, and I understand why now. I waited. I'm cautious when I should be bold when I should be cautious. David pushes me, Catherine charms me, and I let myself be pulled. I thought steady hands were enough. Turns out steady hands can still drop things if they aren't watching. For a long moment, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, a man weighed down by the idea that legacy had passed him by. You've kept the company alive, I said. But alive isn't enough anymore. You can still matter. Clients trust you. They need you. I need you. Just not the way you imagined. He gave a short laugh, bitter but warmer than before. So I'm the face, and you're the system. Systems need faces, I said. And faces need systems. The audit pressed on. We found more flaws. Hedges built on wishful thinking, correlations ignored because they weren't convenient. My new team highlighted them in red, and I watched the map bleed. Every line confirmed what I already knew. My family had been chasing appearances, not substance. Late one evening, long after the analysts had gone home, I found an envelope slid under my office door. No signature. Inside was a single typed line, check account 7RD again. The losses weren't accidental. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, like the conference table upstairs. Someone inside was still feeding me breadcrumbs, or warnings. I folded the note carefully, slipped it into my grandfather's letter, and whispered his underlined words again. Stewardship is proved under pressure. Pressure was here. And the war wasn't just with numbers anymore. It was with ghosts, secrets, and the family I couldn't fully sever, even as they tried to sever me. The audit concluded in 4 months, though it felt like 4 years compressed into late nights and bloodshot mornings. Glass walls once reserved for glossy strategy decks were now covered in marker scrawls, tangled arrows, recalculated models, performance deltas that painted a picture no amount of charm could disguise. Mediocre returns, sloppy hedges, too much red. We corrected quietly, shifted allocations, rebuilt risk overlays, diversified not with slogans, but with math. By the second quarter, the numbers told a new story. Performance above benchmarks for the first time in years. Green where red had bled. The board noticed. Richard Chin called me into his office, voice dry but approving. The portfolio is outperforming. Clients are calmer. You've turned skepticism into confidence. The board proposes expanding your oversight to include all company investments, client portfolios, corporate reserves, everything. I absorbed it, a strange mix of triumph and weight. This wasn't just my inheritance anymore. It was stewardship of an entire empire. When the motion passed unanimously, I felt no applause, only silence, heavy and absolute. Catherine was the first to test the new arrangement. She knocked on my door late one evening, tablet in hand, her sharp features softer than I remembered. "Client dinner tonight," she said. "They trust me. They smile. They nod. But underneath, they're still asking about David." "What do you tell them?" I asked. "That he's pursuing other ventures," she said carefully. Then, after a pause, "that you're delivering results." Her eyes searched mine, waiting for either punishment or permission. I gave her neither. "Good. Keep them steady. You're here for relationships, not risk. Play to your strength." She exhaled almost a sigh. "You make it sound like exile." "It's survival," I corrected, "and it's necessary." Catherine nodded once, then left. She didn't thank me, but she didn't resign again either. Dad's apology came less dramatically. A quiet Friday evening, the office mostly empty, he appeared in my doorway holding 2 coffees, the way he used to when he wanted me to fix his computer. He set one on my desk and lingered. "I misjudged you," he said, voice low. "For years. I thought silence meant smallness, that if you weren't shouting for space, you didn't need any. Turns out you were listening, planning. I stayed quiet because silence had always been my weapon," he went on. "I'm sorry for assuming you didn't matter, for letting David and Catherine pull me where they wanted, for not seeing what you were capable of until you forced us all to see it. It wasn't flowery, it wasn't cinematic, it was better, real." "Thank you," I said simply. The next week, I met David in a quiet cafe far from downtown, his choice of battleground. He looked thinner, sharper around the edges, eyes darting with the paranoia of someone trying to build a new kingdom on borrowed sand. "You think you've won," he said before the coffee cooled. "I think I've stabilized what you tried to gamble," I replied. He sneered, but there was a crack in it. Debt had weight. I could see it pressing on his shoulders. I laid out a document between us. "This is an offer, conditional." He blinked. "An offer? You can return, on my terms. A supervised risk rotation under our new CRO. 2 years of oversight. Every product you propose will face my veto, and you disclose your side pocket history in full." David stared, incredulous. "You'd humiliate me like that?" "No," I said softly. "I'd give you a way back. Whether you take it is your choice. Stewardship isn't about destroying people. It's about proving they had a path." He shoved the paper back across the table. "Keep your leash. I'll build my own empire." His words were sharp, but his hands trembled. I left the document anyway. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me." Back in my office, I reread my grandfather's letter. My eyes lingered again on the underlined sentences. Stewardship is proved under pressure. Do not confuse victory with humiliation. It struck me differently now. This wasn't just advice, it was a condition, a test. I remembered Morrison's careful phrasing at the boardroom. Major restructuring requires her explicit approval. There had been something in the trust I hadn't examined closely enough, a clause about stewardship, about how ownership solidified only if proven under stress. Maybe the war wasn't just about saving money. Maybe it was about saving people too, even the ones who fought hardest against me. The weight of that realization pressed heavier than any board vote, heavier than the city skyline that glowed beyond my window. Victory didn't feel like triumph, it felt like obligation. The portfolio had grown, the board had bowed, and yet I found myself alone at the desk, whispering into the silence. What else did you hide from me, grandfather? And what will it cost to pass the test you left behind? The audit results were published to the board in a thick binder, green tabs outweighing red for the first time in years. Performance not only exceeded benchmarks, but positioned Harrison Financial as a firm capable of anticipating markets, not just chasing them. The applause this time wasn't polite, it was unanimous. When Richard Chin cleared his throat, his words came with the weight of consensus. We propose that Ms. Vale's oversight expand to encompass all Harrison investments, company assets, client portfolios, discretionary funds, not just her inheritance, all of it. No one objected. The motion carried. The room turned to me, waiting for a statement of triumph. What I offered instead was measured. We will not gamble. We will innovate responsibly. Transparency will be our signature. And stewardship, not spectacle, will guide every decision. The word lingered. Stewardship. It was the echo of my grandfather's letter, the phrase underlined twice. That night, I asked Morrison, the family's lawyer, to bring me the full trust documents again. He hesitated, then delivered them in a sealed envelope. I spent hours reading by lamplight until my eyes blurred, and there it was, a clause buried deep in legal phrasing. Ownership is subject to conditions of stewardship. The beneficiary must demonstrate 3 things. 1. Prevention of reckless restructuring. 2. Measurable improvement in performance. 3. Provision of good faith remedy for heirs who err. Only then does ownership become indefeasible and publicly disclosable. It wasn't just an inheritance, it was a test. I thought of David, his hands trembling over that cafe table, rejecting my offer but not tearing it up. I thought of Catherine, bruised pride hidden behind competence, now anchoring client trust. I thought of Dad, his eyes hollowed by legacy, but steadier than before, embracing a role he hadn't chosen, but finally accepted. The next morning, I documented everything. Catherine's reassignment to client relations as a preservation of dignity. Dad's continued role as CEO, safeguarding relationships. The conditional offer extended to David, proof that even in his arrogance, I had given him a path back. I sent a memo to the board. Conditions of stewardship have been fulfilled. Ownership is now absolute. Morrison confirmed days later. The test had been passed. With the trust ironclad, the board relaxed. Clients calmed. The firm's reputation, once shaken, settled into something sturdier than before. But peace was not without cost. Catherine approached me after her first successful client dinner. They asked if we're stable, she said, adjusting her blazer. I told them stability isn't the right word. I told them we're resilient. She paused, then added, softer. You were right not to give me the portfolio, but thank you for not cutting me out. It wasn't an apology, it was something closer, acknowledgement. Dad, too, adjusted. Our weekly meetings grew less tense, more productive. He no longer tried to outmaneuver me. He asked questions, sometimes hard ones, but listened to answers. One evening, he admitted, Your grandfather saw me as a manager, not an owner. And he was right. I hate that he was right, but I accept it now. You see systems. I only ever saw appearances. You saw people, I countered. That matters too. He almost smiled. Almost. David remained outside, at least officially. Rumors reached me. Failed pitches, restless clients, his name whispered in corridors, with a mix of admiration and skepticism. He hadn't built the empire he promised that day in the cafe. Not yet. Then, one night, a message appeared in my inbox. No subject, no signature. Just 7 words. What would the rotation look like? I didn't reply. Not yet. Stewardship meant patience. It meant leaving the door open, even for those who tried hardest to slam it shut. A year passed. The portfolio grew from $500 million to $547 million. The industry whispered about the transformation, about the quiet woman who had emerged from the server room with a master's degree and an iron trust. Interviews were requested, articles written, competitors curious. I declined most. Let the numbers speak. On the anniversary of the boardroom upheaval, Dad knocked on my office door. He carried the old photograph of him and my grandfather outside the original Harrison storefront. He placed it on my desk. He used to say the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone underestimates, Dad said. I thought he meant humility. Now I think he meant you. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That evening, the new CIO sent me a report. Network infrastructure audit complete. Everything's running perfectly. Almost like someone spent years maintaining it properly. I smiled, fingers resting on the keyboard. Old habits die hard. I opened a blank process map, the kind I used to sketch alone in the server room, and began to draw again. Systems don't maintain themselves, and owners don't just inherit. They choose. The skyline beyond my window glowed, steady and indifferent. Inside, silence hummed with power. I whispered to no one, to everyone. Stewardship proved. System intact. Test passed. And for the first time, I allowed myself to breathe.